Good evening, everybody. This is the Learning Café entitled Let's Talk About Publishing from Your Thesis. So I've been asked by the DoctorateHub to be the chair for this evening. So hello, everybody. I hope everybody's enjoying themselves. And let's get started. The approach is I'll give you a bit of an overview from as far as looking at publishing from your thesis, and then we'll certainly open up everything to an open discussion. So the intention is that the Learning Cafés are very interactive. We only purely set the scene and then leave it open to discussion, not only for the topic or anything else that's going on or you want to discuss in relation to your thesis or even post-thesis. So what you found is most have spent several months, actually if not years, slogging away, trying to finish or graduate, or you're well underway. And so it's the combination of people that have already graduated or on their way through their thesis or their doctoral journey. So you have the opportunity now that you feel it's time to showcase what type of research findings are of interest or in discussing the options available. And that's what today's about. So let's discuss an overview with some of the type of aspects to consider when you're publishing a thesis. So if you're publishing as a scholar-practitioner in a peer review, or the other option is certainly presenting at conferences. And then there's a whole series of other considerations towards gaining that experience and that depth of knowledge to develop reviewable papers. So it's not straight purely publishing in a scholar practitioner based or a peer reviewed journal, but also incorporates presenting in conferences as well. So when you're looking for the type of journal you want to get involved with, one of the areas to look at is the journal metrics. So, one is the journal impact factor. So that receives quite a tacit acceptance as a scholar quality indicator. So if you're planning to publish being search committees that are evaluating CVs when you're applying for a role, or ranking and tenure track committees when they're examining the faculty members' credentials. Quite often they do look at the journal impact factor as part of that. So in order to calculate that, it measures the frequency of the average article in a given journal as being cited in a particular year. So that helps to assess relative importance, and it's held in the journal citation reports. So to actually do that calculation, they take the total number of times an article was cited during the previous 2 years, divide that by the total number of citable articles in that journal during those same two years, and that gives you a journal impact factor for any particular year. Another area they look at is H indexing. Now, George Hirsch came up with the idea in 2005 to measure an author's publishing impact. So it's coming from a different angle about the actual author itself rather than the journal. Now, based on a list of publications ranked in descending order by the times cited. So, for example, the value of H is equal to the number of papers in the list that have N or more citations. So you can check that out on Web of Science, Scopus and Google Scholar. So if you have a look at the number of papers, for example, on this one, is they have 5 papers, of which when they look at the number of citations per paper, at a point in time where you have 4 papers and 6 citations, which is still higher than the 4, the H for that person or that author is 4. Once they drop down to the 5th paper or 6th paper and it's less than the same number, that drops that and isn't taken into account. So for this particular person, their H factor is 4. Another journal metric is journal rankings. So for example, the scientific journal rankings, they use the H index because this is a scientific factor one. Of the one I looked at is with the SJR, it's all the total journals they look across is there's almost 32,000 global journals they look at. They cater for H index, their ranking, and when you have a look at the open lock, that indicates it's open source journal. When I selected, and you can drop down and look at the subject areas, I just selected, say, the business management and accounting, and I thought, okay, what are all the journals for there? There's still over 1,555 journals. So that's quite a comprehensive site that gives you an indication of the type of journals across the world and what quality they are. Another area to look at is there's two others. There's one is the ABDC, or the Australian Business Deans Council listing. The most recent one of those is 2019. That gives you a journal quality list. So the last one, when they did the 2019 listing, they only endorsed 2,682 journals. So you can see the difference of their focus points. And only around 7.5% of those are considered the A+, which is around 200 journals. Within their 2019 listing, they did a whole series of upgrade, downgrades, added some new journals, removed journals to give them their refreshing of their journal listing. So they do theirs every year. It's certainly worth having a look at, and this is a high listing of understanding where the high ranking type journals are, and that's quite often referred to. Another journal metric one is, again in journal rankings, is the Chartered Association of Business Schools. The last one they did is 2018. They do their ranking every 3 years. The one that you can actually have open access to on the web is the 2015 version. The 2018, you need to be a member in order to be able to access that, and it's certainly well worth accessing the listing to have a look at that. On theirs, they rank their journals a 4+, which is one with quite high distinction. As far as they're concerned, that is excellence, and it's a world-leading journal. So the intention is it has a very high impact factor, and it's setting up where you've got there's a high rejection rate on any article going towards the 4+. So they look at the large-scale data and quite a rigorous theory aspect, and it's quite extremely hard to get into those journals. The next ranking of 4 is also extremely high ranking, and the papers are very heavily refereed. Most people look at the 4-star journals. There is a high submission rate and very low acceptance rate, about 95% rejection. And again, it's one of the high citation impact factors within the field. 3 gives you quite original and well-executed research papers. There's a good submission rate on those. It's also quite selective what they publish, so there is a high rejection rate, and papers are quite heavily refereed on those again. When you look at the 2, which is original research from the acceptable standard, is the reference point, it is quite well regarded, very well refereed, and a citation impact is certainly there. And there's a lot of practitioner-orientated articles are published in level 2 journals and quite well accepted. And then obviously the one which is the general published research of recognised but more modest standard. So you tend to do a lot of citations around the 2, 3s and 4s. So certainly well worth having a look at that. So any journal you're going to go to, have a look at their ranking. Now, one thing you definitely need to be aware of when you're looking at different journals is the predatory publishing tactics. So the type of things you may come across is they're open access but require a fee to publish. It might be totally legitimate, but when a lot of them are, well, we're not even touching a paper until you pay this X amount, and then not even, and then probably still potentially reject anyway. Or the other one is there's poor or no editing or poor or no peer review. They're just accepting everything. So then that becomes obviously a quality issue. Other things such as unethical business practice. So they'll advertise one service but give you something totally different. Another one is making false claims about the impact factors and indexing. So again, have a look at that. Do your own research. Have a look at the journal you're looking at while you're looking at publishing with them, and have a look at understanding where their rankings are. Have a look at their HF impact, the journal ranking. Another area for the predatory publishing is the failure to adhere to acceptable standards of scholarly publishing. Things such as a lot of spelling mistakes, grammar's certainly not where it needs to be. The citations not there, there's missing references, those type of things that just aren't consistent. And another one is quite aggressive solicitation for manuscripts. You do, after some conferences or just totally out of the blue, if you publish, you sometimes get quite predatory people really pushing you to put your manuscript with them and just don't let go. For example, we had one of our papers we published. We just have this random person that just constantly barrages us every 2 or 3 weeks. wanting us to manage or get the editors for a special edition. What they've done is they've taken our abstract, used that as their whole reference point, and then try to push each of the individual authors. So we've agreed, no, this is predatory, don't want to be part of it, and totally just have that automatically go into the waste bin on it. So just be mindful of those things. Some are very legitimate, but again, be very careful with those. So the onus is on you to check and think before you act. So look at the publisher's selection process. So are any papers rejected or all just globally accepted? So how do they make their money? Are they affiliated with other fee charging businesses? Do they force you to actually use their editor or their layouts? How are they pushing you to get their money, and have you then forced you to pay them to do that part? Do they try to do a bait and switch tactic? And that happens quite often. So again, be very careful. Other areas you need to look at is to cover yourself as part of your research piece, is look up any journal that you plan to submit to on the white or blacklist sites. There's some great white and blacklist sites. The whitelist sites, which indicates the journal is certainly worth looking at, is the Open Access Scholar Publishers Association and the Directory of Open Access Journal. Another whitelisting, and they also cover the blacklisting, which is again a very good one to go to, is the Cables. One that looks at all what the journals that should be blacklisted or are blacklisted is the Beals list. Now that was available until 2017 just due to some legal actions, and then it went online. So the way to access it was through the bealslist.weebly.com is their way around that to cover that. Certainly a very, very good listen to have a look at. And other helpful resources available are the Committee on Publication Ethics, the Scholarly Kitchen, and the Association of Learned and Professional Society Publishers. So those gives you areas where you can go and check the journal you are interested in publishing with. So when you're looking at publishing, so what are the type of things you need to consider? So they'll put your toe in the water type, test it out piece. Look at presenting at a conference. Now, BAM's a very good conference, and the ANZAM is another very good conference. Both are the Academy of Management ones, and both actually have, and other ones certainly do, so have a look at those. Have a look at they have a doctoral day, and that actually sets you up so you can have one-on-one or small group discussions on your paper. So it's very supportive, very peer support component. That's usually a doctoral day the day before the conference, and you can put a paper into the doctoral day or an excerpt or a partial paper to have a feedback or a particular section on your thesis. So, and they're actually full academics that do spend quite a bit of time with you, and it's certainly well worth attending. And you also have a whole series of different lectures during that day as well, and have the opportunity to set up some of your networks. So doctoral day is certainly worth attending. Now, when you go to the main conference itself, the papers have been peer reviewed. So you submit a paper, it is peer reviewed and given feedback from at least 2 or 3 people or as part of a peer review component, and must be accepted to actually participate in the main conference. So with those, you can do a development paper. That is one which is a 1,000 or 2,000 word paper, and it gives a bit of an overview, and it's a paper that's in process. So it's certainly not there, but it's coming along. And what you do with those is you have a small group round table or a peer and share feedback. They work very well. It's very informal, but it's also very supportive in the process, and it's very constructive feedback. With the full paper, so you've had feedback on the original peer review before the paper was accepted, then you have it on the day. And with the full papers, you actually have PowerPoint presentation as an option. That is a chaired open forum environment. So you present your paper, then have question and answers. It's timed. You have a chair that controls what's going on. You get some really constructive feedback on those, so it works out very well. And quite often there is a journal associated with the conference that you have the opportunity to put your paper as part of their, hence with the feedback and improvements, forward for consideration for their special editions. So you get, that gives you another channel to go in through for the journal publishing. Things you do need to consider is, do you go sole authorship or do you co-author with your supervisor or others? Quite often, if you're not quite sure of yourself and just finding your feet, co-authoring with your supervisor works really well, and this is quite an acceptable environment to do that. And that may follow on to that paper being published in a journal in the future, that you've had these multi-layers of feedback, so it's helped you improve the quality of that paper. Some conferences, as I said a little earlier, have the associated journals that are more favourable to consider your conference papers that are developing into articles or as part of a special edition, and they're certainly well worth having a look at. When you're looking at publishing in a journal itself, the top things you need to consider, so a bit of that pre-thinking planning. So a lot of it, there is a lot of planning into work out which journal you want to target before you can start writing. So you really need to establish what can you offer in terms of your knowledge or the angle of your thesis you want to promote. So based on that, you may take your thesis and it may turn into 6 or 8 articles. So you're looking at recontextualizing or reframing, restructuring part of it, rewriting components of it, so reprioritizing it. What you're taking your data you worked with, your findings, they may come from a different angle. So you're utilizing that data through different type of methodologies or different aspects to write your article. So what you're doing is you're taking a small piece as your first point and then working to add to it. So rather than say, here's a summary of my entire thesis, blah, that just doesn't work. And it just is too complex, too hard to put that into a 6,000 or 8,000 word article. You try to concentrate 50,000 words into that, and it just doesn't work. And slightly different configuration on how it's written as well. So consider whether you do want to publish solo or co-author with your supervisor or a peer. So understand that aspect, because that does come into play in how you go around it. Decide on what journal you want to submit to. And then consider your journal impact. So as part of that understanding is look at the impact ranking in the H-index and their methodology preferences. If you're doing a quality paper and they only tend to publish quantitative or mixed methods, you're not likely to get a positive review. You're likely to get it rejected. So review all the submission requirements on each of the journals you're looking at. So for example, here I looked at the British Journal of Management, the Long Range Planning and Strategic Organisation. So looked at 3- and 4-star journals. British Journal of Management's 4-star and Strategic Organisation's 3. That one actually goes to 7 pages of comparison. But what I looked at is what does each of them need to be able to submit. So it is quite complex, but understanding where the benefits, so each of these would work on something that was based on strategy, and it worked very well. So read through several papers on your target journal. So for example, I looked at British Journal Management as the first one. I looked at quite a number of the papers in that journal to understand how they focus and how to word and angle the paper for a high chance of being accepted. Now, and this is purely one version, but one version of preparing and writing is, and you've got to work out what works for you. And this one purely is using a co-author approach. So part of your planning stage is really identify the questions you want to answer. Analysis to be reported. Are you going to solo or co-author? And if co-authoring, agree with the person who's going to co-author with you. And target the publications and their requirements. So once you've done all that planning, which is a huge, it's certainly well worth it, then look at the template of that target journal. So set up your page, outline your headings against the requirements. To do it up front, it's in effect sets your template. It makes life so much easier. You're not going back to rethink it at the end. So get the outline structure, construct your tables, figures, have all those in there, and you find you've really set up your rough first draft quite nicely. Then just double check back against the journal checklist and instructions to the authors. Make sure you've got that in play, and then add some of the rest of the wording around that. And then you really got a bit of a second draft, and that could be several rounds to hone the content. So it comes to a stage where you're comfortable to circulate to your co-author if you're going to have a co-author. That feedback process may go through a few iterations to get the quality and the content right. And then that effectively you would have what you consider quite a good third draft that you go to peers if you want some feedback from peers, and I've used that quite effectively a few times. I have a very clear independent that reads through and says, this makes sense to me, or it doesn't, or and challenges some of your thinking. So as a peer, it works out very well. And it happens to be a co-worker as well. And your co-authors working with them to get the content right. And that, coming out of that, you'll end up with quite what I consider an excellent fourth draft. So you may have gone through multi-drafts within to come to the fourth one. You then look at polishing up the presentation, revisit your checklist. Don't get knocked out because you've cited incorrectly, or they've got an English spelling versus an American spelling. So once you've got that together, you've got a final document ready to submit your manuscript to the journal for review. And the all-important, don't forget the cover letter to the editor-in-chief. So you need to sell your paper, reference some journal articles within it, but you need to demonstrate the alignment of your paper to that journal. Why should they look at you? What's the aha to saying, oh, I am interested in this paper, it needs to be reviewed and considered. So a typical ranked journal article, here's a bit of the process. So it gets quite convoluted. For example, the lead author who's going to submit, so that's the reference person with the journal, so they tend to deal with an author. So it could be the lead author, or it could be the person they consider the lead as far as, not necessarily on the ranking listing, but the person they deal with. So that person would put the manuscript in, it gets logged, receipts of the acknowledgement is issued, and that all comes through emails. The manuscript is then read and assessed by the editor or editors, and they have a choice. They can reject without even review, and that's called a desk-based rejection, and quite a high number of articles are rejected at that point. If they consider it's of a decent quality and there's alignment to their journal, they will send it to external reviewers. The reviewers return their response. That goes back to the editor, and it may go through a couple of iterations, see if they think there's different review components needed. And come out of that, they'll either reject it with a notice of resubmission isn't encouraged, it just really isn't a fit, or they suggest that you may want to change and based on the feedback and resubmit for consideration again, which then would go right the way from the start again. They could accept it pending further revision. So the author would go through a submission revision process, or they could accept it. Now, if it goes through the revision process, the author would do the changes, resubmit back to the editor, because that's their key reference point. They go through and assess that, and they, again, at that point in time, they can still reject you. Or they say, no, I might need to have a go to the external reviews and have that review process go through again. And based out of that, they'll either go through further revisions needed, so they go through the cycle, and they could go through several, or they will accept it. So once it gets to that stage, you don't get the rejection. So if it's accepted, it goes through production and then into publication. So as you can see, it can be quite convoluted, and they can take quite a bit of time. But once you're actually published, you actually got through or published on a ranked journal. Just be aware there is quite a high rejection rate from a range of reasons. So make sure you're formatting your grammar, your references. This isn't one of them, by preparing in accordance with the journal's specific requirements. Because that's one of the high rejection areas at desk-based rejection. Because if you give the attitude of, well, here's my paper, your problem, you're going to get rejection at desk-based. So when you get accepted or rejections, just be aware, up to 95% of papers are rejected. So take rejection as a learning opportunity, and where feedback's given, use that to improve your paper for another journal. This is like your feedback you get on your thesis. You get these changes. You don't get through first time round. So you'll get, for example, British Journal Management, very constructive. They gave a lot of information about this is what they liked, what worked really well, but then about 4 pages of this type of feedback you need to look at. So that worked out very well. You can then take that and review, utilise that if the view on that particular one was, it got through all the reviews, but it got down to rejected with resubmission not encouraged. So the fit wasn't quite there. And based off that, made a decision to look at, okay, what is a journal that would suit where there's currently up with the change that we're taking into account. So that worked out well, and then that was actually it had to align to that journal component as far as the configuration and layouts, but that was actually accepted on that second journal. So just be aware of all those papers approved, very few move through without adjustments being required. And so use that feedback to hone the paper so it's ready for publication. Don't give them the reason to reject you when it gets down to the next level. So getting accepted, Yahoo, celebrate, have a cuppa. But certainly well worth it. But just be aware that there's anywhere up to 95% rejection rate. So don't assume you're not there. It's just the rejection rate that comes into play. A lot of them could be 20% rejection rate, 20% acceptance rates. Some are only 5%. So it's still quite low. So when you're looking at reviewing feedback from the journal, so it's similar to your thesis, set up as a table. So you've got who the reviewer was, what their type of comments were, and then work out what your actions are going to come through on that. So each of the people that say you're co-authoring, each person's aware of what the review and actions are required. Add remarks to interpret the feedback and what it means to the paper. Allocate the actions. So if there's several co-authors, allocate the actions and set a time frame and stick to them. If you're doing reviews for it to go back to the journal, they're extremely tight timeframes. You must stick to them or it gets rejected. And whatever you do, proofread prior to resubmission. Then return within the timeframe and add a thank you and the actions taken noted so they actually know what the actions were completed, so it was catered for. Your actual review piece wouldn't necessarily be this table, it'd be a slightly different variation to cater for the journal as the audience, where this was the co-authors as the audience. Where it's rejected from a journal and utilising that to improve the paper to go to another journal, that time frame is not quite as tight, but still be aware that if you've made a commitment to another co-author, stick to that commitment and that time frame, because you're working as a team on achieving this. When you're looking at seeking out experience in peer reviewing, is another alternative. One is providing peer review feedback for conferences. So you select when you submit your paper, you select strands that you are willing to be a peer reviewer for, or you could offer independent of submitting papers. Some conferences actually ask within the peer environment, are you willing to review papers without necessarily submitting one yourself? And I'll be doing that to a different another conference a bit later on. And that particular conference is going to be online. Be very clear, there's very clear review parameters are provided for you to use. And so that actually works out really well because it helps you understand how the paper is actually evaluated. You need to provide constructive critique and recommendations on accept or reject the submission. And when you're looking at development papers, you are expected and you should be providing much more comprehensive feedback. You're not telling them how to write the paper, but you're giving that feedback, which makes anybody doing the paper you're developing, that is so crucial to get that understanding and help. And then obviously the other option is offering review service to peer review journals in your speciality area. On the right-hand side, the example is the BAM 2020 conference this year. And I've reviewed 3 papers, 2 were full papers and 1 was a developmental paper. And it was a developmental discussion paper. And they were from 3 different tracks. So it was, I said I was comfortable with several tracks and I ended up being asked to review a paper on several of those. Having reviewed papers last year for BAM, ANZAM and several other conferences, it gives you a bit of an insight of how things work. So when you're looking at other areas to consider writing to gain some experience, so to help you write for journal articles or the like, is consider looking at these chapters in a book. There's an entire book which has your chapters transform into chapters of the book. Your thesis may actually very well work into an entire book. It could be a series of short articles to build from your baseline to the final findings. So what you may do is take a small snippet of your thesis, turn that as the first article, and then you're progressively taking little snippets to get your final findings. So you're actually showing there's development and growth And they're particularly in practical articles or theoretical areas, they work out very well. And this is where you get 5, 6, 7 articles out of your thesis. Other ones is such as teaching aids and modules. That helps you actually get your structural thinking, which works very well for articles, which is quite different to your thesis. Other ones is contributions to trade journals. It doesn't necessarily need to be an academic journal. Trade journals are always looking for information. How the structuring on those is really quite structured, and it really helps coming out of the practical based or your thesis. You can add quite a lot of value there. Other ones are online articles, blogs, 500-word snippet, small, sharp, it works really well, gets the message across, people understand. Other ones is doctoral writing groups. It's certainly well worth having a look at some of your peers to get a small group together called, they're looking at different parts of thesis and how that could be turned into a paper. And that quite often you may end up with co-authors as a result. You're getting really clear critique and feedback and understanding, and everybody's growing as part of that process. Other ones are things such as policy papers or white papers. They're also very structured, a lot of quality information. You learn so much as you pull those together. Having done numerous policy papers, white papers and green papers, and when it comes into regulation, that structure comes in very well. Business cases and project proposals at work, or when you're consulting. What you may find is your consulting proposal will morph into an article in the future because you're delivered the result of the project, but it's also in agreement that coming out of that will be some research that you can then turn into an article. So you get a dual benefit out of it. Other areas is research funding proposals. You need to understand what you go to research and in order to get the funding, and that may be a bonus of actually having some dollars towards it. Other ones are your case studies, network documents, and how-to documents. So it gives you quite a range of different areas that you could be writing to gain experience and actually imparting your knowledge and understanding. So really, bottom line is, what's your motivation to write? Is it as a practitioner, as an academic, or both? So this is the obligatory references that we've gone through. So this is all gives you all the contents or contact points on those. So that's certainly been a slide deck that's circulated. And at this point, it's over to you to discuss further, or both on the topic, today's topic, or an open discussion on anything around a nominated topic, or a bit of a space about your thesis journal, or any supportive peer-based environment information you're after. So what I'll do is we'll turn off the recording so we can have an open discussion. So feel free to contribute and ask any questions. Great, so any final comments or questions? Right, just as a rounding out, just to let you know, the Doctoral Hub has invited you to have it your way, so to speak. So what they actually provide is the scheduling. So you can schedule a date for webinars, advanced courses, workshops, residencies. Learning Cafés is another one that they'll do online or at short notice. So if you go to the Doctoral Hub, that allows you to actually schedule anything that actually suits yourself. And thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and hopefully see you at the next Learning Café.